So welcome to CLI 302. This is demystifying the deployment of Office 2010 on Microsoft App V. It's not to be confused with what's on the door, which is demystifying the deployment of Office 2010 and App V. This is about Office 2010 being deployed in an App V bubble, in an App V environment. And we get spoken about lots in Microsoft. We get asked lots of different questions about things around deploying Office. We get asked around, how do you go around sequencing Office 2010? What are the steps that I need to go through to get Office 2010 virtualized and delivered out there into my organization? We also get lots of questions about licensing. Who here knows that in Office 2010 the licensing model has changed? Who here knows? So there's a group of us that don't know this. It's been changed to a KMS or a Mac activation service. There's also questions about the deployment. How can I get this my Office 2010 image out there? How can I get it out there customized in the correct fashion, customized with the correct settings that I need to have in my organization? And that's what this session is going to get, hopefully, demystified for you. Hopefully, we're going to get through this session, making you the experts of deploying Office 2010 with Microsoft App V. So just a bit of background. My name's Justin Zarb. I'm a Premier Field Engineer in EMEA. And I go to lots of different customers, helping them deploy Microsoft App V in a proactive fashion. So in other words, I help them to not have issues. My goal is to make them well before they even get ill. It's to give them their flu tablets before they even get a flu. And that's what I like to see. I like customers to have a great experience with our technologies. I like to see them deploy it in the best possible fashion. I don't like you raising calls and spending lots of money on Premier support calls. So this session is really to help make sure that you have the correct knowledge and correct information for you to get this out there. So I want to do this in a couple of different phases. My key takeaways for you guys are to make you experts. Make you experts and have the understanding and knowledge for getting Office 2010 virtualized and then delivered out there. And what do you need to know to make sure it's successful? And not just successful once, but successful multiple times that you deploy it out there. I'm going to go through and tell you a bit of a background story. Why did we end up coming to our deployment methodology like we do today? Why do we deploy a deployment kit down to the operating system first to make sure that Office works correctly? What was the drivers for some of the things that we did in this deployment kit? I then want to start talking about some of the planning. What do you need to understand? What do you need to take into consideration before you deploy Office 2010 out there into your environment? Then we're going to go through some of the sequence and stages. And what do you need to do to make sure that your Office 2010 is customized successfully for your organization? And then we'll cover off some of the publishing methodologies that you can use, and we'll go into quite an in-depth sort of demo on the end results of that. So why virtualize Office? Why virtualize it? Why have it virtualized with App V? So I've done this pyramid scheme to show you the benefits of using Microsoft App V, and from the best is at the bottom of the pyramid all the way through to some of the other additional benefits. And one of the core benefits of using Microsoft App V is isolation. With Microsoft App V, we can basically have an isolated environment for our application to run in. So that means if I'm going to go ahead and deploy out an application into my estate, and I may have 500 other applications out there in my estate, I now have the peace and knowledge that my application is all in its own isolated environment. And when I deliver it out there to my customer's environment, it's not going to go out there and break anything. It's not going to overwrite a DLL or change the registry, which is going to cause 60 or 70 of my other applications to start not functioning correctly and raise support calls. So there's a big benefit of having applications isolated. One of the other side effects for this isolation is you get side-by-side conflict resolution, which means that I can have Office 2007 and Office 2010 running side by side without any conflict, without any issues, without any namespace conflicts that I would normally have if I deployed out Office 2010 and Office 2007 side by side natively to my platform, which means that I can keep the business productivity going forward and also get the benefits of starting to test the newest release of the Office suite in my environment. We also have fast deployment. When you virtualize an application using Microsoft App V, we basically turn this application into an on-demand service, which means that if your user wants a specific application or a specific Office suite, we can just deliver it to them. And we know we're not going to impact the base operating system because the application is isolated. So now the application is instantly available for your end users. It's instantly on. There's no install that needs to take place. We also have the benefits of add-in and provisioning. So how many of you have challenges managing your add-ins in your environment? So a particular business unit requires an add-in for Word or Office. So we've got a few nods all around there. Well, now with Microsoft AppV, we can virtualize those add-ins independently of your Office suite. And if your specific business unit requires a specific add-in, you can deliver it just to that specific business unit. So if your sales team require a plug-in to Excel, you can deliver that plug-in to Excel just to the sales team, rather than having to deploy it to all of your computers in your sales division or all of your computers in your estate. And it's easy to service. Now I'm not having to worry about patching that add-in on the fly to all of my computers. I can now just patch the specific add-in and make it available for the current existing Office suite out there, and it's in its own isolated environment. And we're going to show hopefully a good demo of that a bit later on. We also have simplified delivery. And with Microsoft AppV, we integrate really well into third-party ESD solutions that you have out there, such as SMS 2003. And we integrate super great into SCCM 2007 R2 SP2. So you get a really straightforward, simplified delivery in your environment straight away. But if you don't have one of those two environments, you can also use the AppV full infrastructure to deliver applications on demand to your end users. The other great benefit that you get from virtualization is easy application management. We have a built-in methodology and a built-in management infrastructure so that you can maintain and manage the complete life cycle of your applications. So you can virtualize it and have it set up from its cradle birth, patch it really easily in its own isolated environment, and then when you want to retire it, just switch it off. And that whole life cycle is managed in a much simpler fashion for you. However, as great as that sounds, AppV also does have some limitations around it. And I just wanted to give you some background on Microsoft AppV. So when you take an application and you virtualize it, we sandbox it. And we sandbox it into an environment called the System Guard. And inside that System Guard, we have all of the binary information around your application. So what registry keys does that application require? What file systems, what binaries, what exes, what DLLs, they all get captured in this System Guard environment. And when we launch the application in this System Guard environment, it's in its own isolated sandboxed environment. The operating system underneath it knows nothing. It doesn't know that this application is existing on the platform. It just knows that it's its base operating system, and in memory, we just see the application run. So this is fantastic. We have this great story around isolation. It's just easy. We can have now these multiple applications that would have caused us pain before in the past. However, when you start to talk about Office, you also start to talk about other things, such as Office in itself is a platform, and applications depend on Office. So then we have some things such as integration limitations. And we have this great thing with isolation, but isolation is a double-edged sword, because some things want to be seen. So, for example, if I have a plugin and I try and install that plugin, and Office is in its own little sandboxed environment, I can't see I can't see Office, and therefore that plugin may fail. Another example we have from Office 2007 was the Mail To functionality. You go to a Word document and you right-click on it, and you want to do a Send To. And normally when you right-click on Send To, it gives you an option for a mail recipient. Now, the problem is that all of our registry keys around the Send To functionality is in this virtualized environment. It's in that System Guard environment. So the operating system doesn't know that when I right-click on a docx or a .doc file, there should be a Send To command there. So we lose that functionality. We lose that piece of that functionality for that application that actually we want to get. So the Microsoft Office 2010 team and the Microsoft AppV team thought long and hard about this, and we had a lot of really intense feedback from customers saying, we need these features. We need certain features to make sure Office can be virtualized successfully and we have a good experience with Office. So right at the beginning of us doing our AppV 4.6 and in the life cycle of Office 2010, the two product teams got together and really fleshed out a solution. And the solution basically, we wanted to take away these integration limitations. And we did that by creating something called the Office 2010 Deployment Kit for AppV. Now, inside that deployment kit, we laid down certain files to the base operating system to allow that integration to work really smoothly. So, for example, things such as SharePoint, going to a SharePoint site and opening a document on that SharePoint site, using search to search for a particular document or an email, or even if it's just using the send to functionality of a document in the Explorer shell. So we said we'd get all of this sorted out and we'd deliver this out there for use in AppV 4.6. But when we did deliver that out there for our customers, we had some further feedback. And our customers said, well, we're not ready to go to AppV 4.6 yet. We're just finishing off AppV 4.5. So we went back and we thought about this a bit more, and we made the conscious decision to integrate this also in with AppV 4.5 SP2. So you can now sequence Office 2010 with AppV 4.5 SP2 and deliver that also back to your AppV 4.5 SP2 clients in your infrastructure. So let's start off. What is the Office Deployment Kit and why is it here? Well, the Office Deployment Kit is something new that we've never created for Office before. It's specifically used for Office 2010. And it's a small, roughly about 10 meg file that you can download from Microsoft directly. And its core functionality, and it's one of its core components, and one of its requirements is for the licensing service for the new Office 2010 platform, and to make that work correctly for client activations. The other big piece around the Office Deployment Kit is for what we call proxies. And those proxies allow integration from the local operating system into the AppV virtualized application of Office 2010. It allows us to do things like fast search in Outlook. It allows us to do things like work on documents in SharePoint libraries, do send to OneNote printer, mail control panel applets work correctly. And it also allows things like simple mapping and the Office document indexing. And we'll go through each one of those components later on in the session. So that deployment kit opens that up for us. It enables those functionalities to work correctly and enables us to virtualize Office 2010 and have a rich user experience for our end users. So let's take a little bit more of a deeper look at one of those components in the deployment kit. And the one I like to show is the interaction with Office and SharePoint. Who here uses SharePoint in their environment today? So that's a great lot of you, and you use it for document management and have your documents up there and editing, version control, change control in your environment. Now, if we take the situation, I want to phase the first half of this piece around Office 2007. And essentially what would happen is, when we deploy an AppV application, we push it down using something like an XML manifest file. And that XML manifest file registers OSD files for us, it registers file type associations, shortcuts, and also launch paths around the application. Now, when you go onto a SharePoint site and you go to right-click and edit a document, or you go to just read a document, that initializes an ActiveX controller. And because our virtualized version of Office has the ActiveX controller in there, SharePoint has no access from the local operating system to the ActiveX component that's been virtualized because it's in its isolated environment. It's hidden away in the system guard. The local operating system can't interact with that. So what we opted to do was we opted to do the use of the deployment kit to lay down some of these functionalities on the base operating system to us. And when you go and sequence Office 2010 using our recipe online, we actually we create additional OSD files that actually activate and communicate with those components that are there on the base operating system. So we have an ActiveX controller that is virtual environment aware. So now when we go to edit that SharePoint document, that speaks to the modified ActiveX controller that we laid down with the deployment kit, which also understands about the virtualized version of Office and passes that to the correct ActiveX controller in the virtualized version of Office and allows us to launch our application correctly. So that's how we've targeted it, and we've designed some of our proxies in Office 2010 to allow the rich functionality that your users require to use. So let's talk about a customer that's actually going out there and using Office 2010 on AppV for testing and for checking that the functionality that they want works correctly. And BMW in Europe is doing exactly that. They're taking the Office 2010 suites and virtualizing those to run alongside their Office 2007 deployment in their production estate. And they want to use it for testing and making sure that the users can be migrated over to Office 2010 successfully, but not lose any of the productivity features that they have with Office 2007. So that's some of the past, that's some of the history. So let's talk about some of the other core concepts that really we want you guys to be empowered with. And this is the flow of the presentation. So we've got 3 core sections: planning, sequencing, deployment. The generous Q&A time is actually the generous Q&A time outside on the right-hand side after the session finishes, and I'll be there for as long as you guys want. But in the planning stage, what I want to pass back to you is understanding some of the limitations and features, also understanding some of the integration with other add-ons and other plugins that you may have in your environment. When you do a deployment out there, what client considerations do you need to be aware of in your environment? And what about the Office installation considerations? What do you need to think about? And also, what about creating a test plan? What do you need to take into consideration when you are deploying this out there? What are the things that your end users actually do want? So in Microsoft App V, there are a number of limitations that we have, and this is basic App V stuff. But one of the things we get from this system guard environment by virtualizing our applications is basically a limitation of app-to-app interaction. And what I mean by that is, if we have 2 virtualized applications sequenced independently, one virtualized application cannot communicate with another. So how do we resolve that? How do we sort those sort of issues out? Well, actually, what we can look to do is take those 2 separate virtualized applications, or those 2 separate applications, and virtualize them together in one big bubble. We could also use things like dynamic suite composition. Who here knows what dynamic suite composition actually is? I'll show this a little bit later on, but essentially what dynamic suite composition allows us to do is to take a primary application and another virtualized application that we've created and say, when this primary application starts up, I want you to suck in the secondary application and allow it to be seen inside the single virtual environment. So now you can have these add-ons and plugins that you virtualize separately in one big bubble, all communicating correctly. But what happens if we then start sequencing all of these add-ins and plugins together? What happens if we start sequencing multiple applications together? Surely we're going to come to another App V limitation. And the other App V limitation is that we have a max package size of 4 gigs. So when you start creating virtualized applications, if you create lots of virtualized, applications in one virtual environment, we have a max limit of our SFT file of 4 gigabits. Now, the problem with that, you start thinking to yourself, oh my God, that surely is never going to be enough room. But what we're going to do later on in this session, we're going to show you actually how we can use things like compression and how you can take advantages of some of our best practices to reduce that size of that virtualized application. And the other big piece, the other big limitation that really you need to be aware of is that the OS is unaware of Office 2010. So, for example, if you have a SharePoint site that's trying to, and you want to launch a Word document, we're unaware that Office is actually installed on the platform. But that's what the deployment kit is here to do. The deployment kit is here to help the operating system be aware that Office 2010 is virtualized and pass the correct information over to Office. So a few key questions that you have to ask yourself when you are virtualizing Office or you're looking to virtualize Office. The first one is Office being used as a platform? And what do I mean by platform? When I go into many customers, Office is actually one of their big critical applications. It's something that they have many of their other CRM applications speaking into, or it's one of the tools that they basically build upon for their business workflow or their business productivity. And if that's the case, you have to bear in mind that if we virtualize Office 2010, those tool sets or those add-ins, those plugins, those additional applications won't be able to see Office 2010 because it's in its own virtual environment, it's its own virtual bubble. So we now need to start taking into consideration what do we do about all of those additional add-ins, all of those additional plugins, all of those additional tool sets to make sure that when you deploy Office 2010, you have a good experience. And you can use things like dynamic suite composition, and you can use things such as suiting all of those applications into one big bubble. There are also questions that you have to ask yourself, such as, are there any applications that integrate with Office that must stay native on the operating system? But we can't virtualize, that we just can't afford to deliver there as an the application. And that will also change some of your mindset and some of your planning considerations when you are looking at virtualizing Office 2010 in your environment. Because what you want is a real rich experience, but you don't want any limitations. You don't want to have a dozen support calls instantly raised as soon as you virtualize Office. So there are some key questions to ask yourself. Whenever you're going through this whole process of planning, ask yourself, is Office a platform? Are there applications that need to stay native on my operating system? And if these questions you answer is yes, then you need to do further planning on how to mitigate those sorts of situations. So when we start planning our Office installation or our Office deployment, a good thing to actually be aware of is actually what Office suites can we actually virtualize using AppV. And from the sets of suites, from the sets of Office, it's any Office deployment that is part of the volume licensing SKU set. So that could be anything from Office Professional Plus, Small Business, Basics, and Standard. Also, any of the standalone applications, and that also includes things such as Visio and Project you can virtualize using Microsoft AppV. Now, what we generally see from a field perspective is that Project Plus is probably the most heavily used for virtualizing Microsoft Office 2010 out in customer sites. But please, as I say, be aware that Project and Visio can also be virtualized and delivered out there as part of that single package. So now you've selected your version of Office, your standalone products that you want to virtualize and deliver out there. What other things do we have to consider? What other things does Office integrate with and is important for our environment to be aware of? So these are some of the common things that we generally see out there when we go and visit customers. We generally see things such as Microsoft Live Meeting need to be integrated with the Office suite. Office Communicator is a key one because we want that rich presence information and also the ability to just instigate chats and set up meetings. SharePoint services because we want to be able to edit and manipulate documents online. And also add-ins, things like Outlook connectors or conference room finders or plugins just to do big PowerPoint pivots or Power Pivots in your environment. And then you have your standard line of business applications that your company creates to make business productivity much more efficient and much more easier in your environment. And you have to take these all into consideration. You can't just forget about any of these items because your Office deployment either fails or succeeds based on how much planning you do understanding these integration components in your environment. So this is some basic AppV work here. So we've got many different methods that we can look to deploy Office 2010 within AppV. And here are some of the options. I'll go from left to right. So we have the ability to sequence Office with all of our plugins, all of our add-ins, all of our components in our environment into a single package. Now, the pro about that is that it's easier to sequence. We just do it once and we deliver that all the way through and we deliver it to our end user community and they get all of the add-ins and all of the plugins that they want to have. Now, the con around that is it's a larger package that you're going to deliver out there into your environment, and it's also a little bit more complex to service. So if you want to upgrade or fix one or two line of business plugins or upgrade one or two add-ins, then you have to upgrade that complete package and update those individual add-ins as part of the whole suite. We also have the option which is the branch office package. And this generally comes to play when we have a customer that has a sales division, a customer that has a finance division, a customer that has a marketing division. And then what they end up doing is they sequence Office multiple times, targeting each one of those individual divisions, and they put the add-ins or plugins specifically for those divisions in their business. So that means you end up with multiple Office packages that you're delivering out there in your environment. And also there's a hit on servicing in your environment because now you're having to maintain each one of those Office packages independently for each one of those different divisions in your business. The next option is one called Dynamic Suite Composition. And that's where we create a single package for Office 2010 and we virtualize that on its own with potentially a couple of our core add-ins in our environment. And then those line of business add-ins that we require, we add in dynamically. we take that secondary virtual application and we just stick them together so that your users can have the rich experience that they want with their add-ins and their business productivity suites, but now they're just delivered on demand to those environments. The benefit here is it's more granular with servicing. So if we need to upgrade a particular add-in, I can just take that add-in to one side, upgrade it, and deliver it back out there. The more complexity comes with sequencing, because now you need to sequence Office 2010 on its own, and then sequence as a dynamically suited package the separate add-ins for your Office suite in your environment. So as I said, you get increased control on the left-hand side, but also increased complexity moving down to the right-hand side. So what do we recommend? What does Microsoft recommend? What do we do internally? Well, when we sequence Office and Office 2010 internally, we tend to recommend that we sequence Live Meeting inside our virtualized package with the Office suite, Office Communicator, common add-ons that are readily available to everyone, and also we want that SharePoint integration. So that really gets encapsulated with the deployment kit and rolling the deployment kit out there to our client PCs. What we then do internally is whenever you require an additional plugin or add-in, we essentially dynamically suite those add-ins or line of business plugins into the Office suite. So this gives you that really rich granular control of what add-ins you actually get in the Office suite, but without losing any of the integration experience that you want straight out of the box using Office 2010. Now, earlier on I said, one of the limitations with AppV is this 4 gig SFT file limit. Now, 4 gigs is actually a lot of space, and to be honest with you, I've only seen a handful of customers that have ever exceeded or almost exceeded the 4 gig file limit. So what we ended up doing was we ended up going back internally and testing if we sequence Office 2010 with all of the plugins that we require in Microsoft, what do we end up with? Now, when you do add in more and more stuff into your package, it has a further impact in your environment. There's an impact on streaming because a bigger package, there's more to stream down there, more bandwidth gets consumed, and also we've got this maximum size limit on 4 gigs. So we went ahead and we virtualized Office. And we did a full installation of Office as every single feature ticked, and we didn't use any compression from the Microsoft AppV sequencer. And when we did this, we basically got a package size of 2.4 gigs. Now, inside the sequencer, we have an opportunity to actually use compression. There's a little checkbox, and you check it, and we will basically go through and compress the whole SFT file down. And when we did that compression, our SFT file reduced from the 2.4 gig limit to a 1.4 gig SFT file. So that's over a gig we saved by just using compression on that Office installation. Now, on top of that, we've got this thing inside Office 2010 called the MSO cache. Out of interest, hands here, who knows what the MSO cache actually is? So there's a few of us. So let's just basically clean this up for us. So the MSO cache is basically the Office installation files, and they sit on the local platform. So if an end user wants to repair the Office installation, they can do that. They can just literally go there, hit repair, and they don't need the source media to actually do that repair functionality that takes place. So now we went back, and we took our full installation, sequenced it, but at the very end of the installation, we removed the MSO cache from the sequenced application. And straight away, we came down to 1.5 gigs. So originally, 2.4 gigs, no compression. Now we're full installation, no compression, with the MSO cache removed, we come down to 1.5 gigs. And to take it a step further, we tried compression again, and we ended up being under a gig in size. We ended up being 0.8 or 800 megs for the complete installation and a complete SFT file. So you basically don't have to worry about this 4 gig file limitation, because now we can compress the package right down and really get the benefits of virtualizing Office with AppV. So here are some further planning considerations. So now we've got a good understanding. We now know what our Office installation we're going to use. We know we're going to take off, we're going to use compression. We're going to get rid of the MSO cache. Now what do we need to start thinking about? So now we need to start thinking about our client OS and our architecture. And we need to think about the sequencing station preparation, and we've got a sequencing best practice white paper that you can utilize to configure your sequencer correctly. And we also now need to think about the deployment kit. So the deployment kit comes in two flavors. It comes in a 32-bit flavor and a 64-bit flavor. And the deployment kit itself is matched against your operating system bitness. So if you're going to deploy out a 64-bit OS to your environment, you need to use the 64-bit version of the deployment kit. And if you're going to deploy out a 32-bit version of Windows, you need to use the 32-bit version of the deployment kit. The deployment kit is not a match for your version of Office that you look to deploy. Once we do that, we now need to decide on our Office version that we're going to release out there. Are we going to release the 32-bit version of the Office Suite, or are we going to release the 64-bit version of the Office Suite into our environment? Now, with both of those Office Suites, you have to do certain considerations. So with both versions, the 32-bit and the 64-bit Office Suite, the deployment kit adds the licensing component to allow Office to be activated correctly. However, only with the 32-bit version of the Office Suite do the proxies exist. So that's when you have the whole searching or the rich mail search using the deployment kit. So that's not a bad thing, right? Although those proxies aren't there for the 64-bit version, they do exist for the 32-bit version of Office. And what we are seeing from our customer deployments out there, that the majority of customers are looking to deploy out the 32-bit version of Office into their environment and then be very selective with which version of the 64-bit version of the Office Suite they deploy out there. So we tend to see customers looking to use Excel 64-bit edition and then use the remainder of the 32-bit version of Office in their environment. The last consideration piece that we need to take into account is Office 2007 already out there in your environment? Have you already deployed out Office 2007 and you're going to need to migrate the Outlook profile at a later point in time to Office 2010? And as part of the recipe, we already do that for you. We already take that into account for a migration from Office 2007 to Office 2010. However, what we do also recommend is that if you are using Outlook 2007 as your primary Office Outlook client in your environment, is that you just hide Outlook 2010 from being used until you're at a point where you're ready to migrate your clients over to Outlook 2010. So as I said, in Office 2010, we now have this new licensing model. And the licensing model doesn't change whether you're using a virtual version of Office or whether you're using a local installation of Office. It's exactly the same. And we have two methods for activation. We have a KMS activation, where you basically have a server in your organization's perimeter. And when your client starts up and Office executes, we basically take a license from that KMS server. We also have a method called MAC activation. And what MAC activation does is we put a 5x5 key onto the client platform, and when the client starts up Office, the Office Suite actually activates against the Microsoft servers rather than your own internal server base. And so you can use those two functionalities, or you can use a combination of both, where you may say, actually, you know what, I want to use KMS for my Office Pro Plus suite, but actually I want to use MAC activation for Visio and projects. So you can use a real good combination. There's tons of documentation around the licensing methodology for Office 2010, and really it's a good read. So please do go and have a check out on the TechNet site for that documentation. Also, when you come to deploying Office 2010 on your sequencing workstation, there's lots of customization options that you can use and have. So you can use the OCT tool, which is the Office Customization tool, to get all your settings exactly right. Or you can use group policy, or you can use a config.xml file, or you can basically use a command line installation. And again, there's tons of documentation for how you want to set up Office in your environment. And every customer is different with their Office deployment. There's no one-size-fits-all for delivering Office into your environment or onto your client platforms. Every customer is different, and every customer has different considerations. So again, it doesn't change from whether you virtualize Office or whether you have Office on the locally delivered to the platform. The customizations will take place in the same way. So the other big thing I tend to recommend to customers doing is actually just get a test plan together. Get a number of key considerations that when you deploy Office 2010 out there into your environment, you want to basically just be able to tick off and make sure they're absolutely spot on and we've delivered exactly what we've delivered against. So here's a list that we tend to use, or you can basically build up your own ones internally. And these are maybe the 5 most frequently used Office features in your environment, or the most frequently used features in a particular department in your environment. So for example, I must be able to right-click on a document and send that document to someone. I must be able to use Live Meeting from within Outlook. I must be able to use SharePoint to edit and manipulate documents. I must be able to use the Outlook social connector so I can keep track of my friends on Facebook. I must be able to insert videos and pictures into PowerPoint. Basically, understand your end user's requirements and make sure when you deliver a virtualized or even a local install of Office that it meets those end user requirements, because you're basically servicing those end users as your customers, and we want to make sure that they have the best experience with whichever version of Office you deploy into your environment. So there's all our steps for planning. We've done our planning. It's gone really well. Little John in the sales team, he's really happy, and we've had a lot of good feedback from him about what we're trying to deliver. So now what I want to talk about is some of the sequencing stages that we're going to use to virtualize Office. I want to quickly cover off the sequencing prep. Then I want to demystify some of our deployment kit flags. And when you go through the recipe, you're going to see 2 distinct sections. There's a section on sequencing the Office 2010 platform, and there's also a section around the deployment kit flags. I just want to basically talk you through them. I want to also go through and talk about updating and patching Office, and also some of the tricky sections in the deployment kits, actually helping you understand what we're trying to achieve in those sections. And then I want to just go into dynamic suite composition as well. So this is the most important thing I really want to portray out there, is that Microsoft does not give a pre-sequenced version of Office 2010 for use in a production environment. And why is that? Well, Office 2010 itself, we give very good prescriptive guidance for how you can set it up and install it and customize it in your particular needs and requirements. Also, every customer is different. So it's really hard for us to say who needs a specific part of the Office 2010 suite. So we don't give a full-blown SFT file that you can just go ahead and use straight into production environment. We advocate that you actually sequence that yourself, and we've got tons of good documentation on how to do that. It's true, Microsoft has released a Office 2010 SFT file inside the POC Jumpstart. So we've actually got a Jumpstart kit that gives you a pre-sequenced version of Office to test in a non-production environment and to test in that scenario. So once you're ready to start sequencing, one of the other things that we recommend is reading the sequencing white paper. And this is a white paper that the AppV product team delivered on the best practice for setting up your sequencing workstation for encapsulating virtualized applications. And there's a number of recommendations that we do abide to. So we tend to say sequence on a virtual machine, so you can roll back your sequencing machine back to its clean image at the end. Try and match your target operating system's machine so that they can interact and the interaction components work correctly. And then we have a basic flow that we tend to abide by. So as I say, we have this prepare, monitor, edit. Prepare, have your clean machine with the deployment kit set up and already installed there. Monitor, that's where we go through and we install Office 2010. We have all of the customization set. We delete certain registry keys. We add our certain add-ins that we require. And then edit. And this is where we add in the other proxies and add in any other virtual registry components that we need to add. So this is what you're going to get. When you get your download your deployment kit, you're going to basically have to deploy the deployment kit onto your sequencing workstation before you start sequencing Office 2010. And this is the command line you're going to use. Now, the first section of this command line, and the command line is just a standard MSI exec command line, but the first section of the deployment kit is officevirt.msi. Now, as I said earlier on, your officevirt.msi will be dependent on what version of the operating system you're using. And what I mean by that is what architecture of the operating system you're using. The deployment kit does not match the bitness of Office you're deploying. It all matches the bitness of the operating system. So we've seen some customers have issues where they thought it matched the bitness of the Office suite that they were deploying and had inaccurate results. So be aware and be cautious when you do deploy the deployment kit to your sequencer. The second section is the feature flags. And what we do in the feature flags is when we install the deployment kit onto the platform, we actually install certain components onto the sequencer so that when we start monitoring the install of Office 2010, we don't capture these specific components because we don't want to. They're going to be existence on the client platform when we deliver the deployment kit to our production environment. So that's things such as the ActiveX integration with SharePoint that we showed earlier on. One thing to also mention on this, also again, be aware of what version of the operating system you're using. Again, it's very much dependent on the bitness of the OS that you're using. So again, use the top line if you're using a 32-bit operating system, the bottom line if you're using a 64-bit operating system. Once you've done that, you can now have licensing flags. And the licensing flags can be used to define what versions of Office you're using. So we've got a very simple set of flags for that, where 1 equals enable. So for example, Pro Plus 1 is enabled. And we can also specify our KMS servers or our 5x5 Mac activated keys on the sequencing workstation. Now, one thing that's quite important is the bottom line there is user operation equals 1. That basically just says that if you are using Mac activation and we need to enable or activate the Office suite, just allow that to take place for a standard user. Don't prompt them for any innovation. So once you've installed the deployment suite on the platform, you can then go through and sequence the whole of Office 2010. And the steps for sequencing Office 2010 are inside our deployment kit. And literally, it is very much a step-by-step workflow for getting that installed. So I'm not going to go through that. I'm going to imagine that we've already sequenced Office 2010. It's already complete. I followed the steps. And then at the end of my installation of Office 2010, I just want to make sure Office 2010 is to its optimal level. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to install any updates or patches for Office. Now, Office itself has already had some updates released to it, and those updates can be downloaded and made available today. And you could do that in a couple of different ways in the sequencer. You can either go to Microsoft Updates in the sequencer and install the updates and patches from Microsoft Update, or you can get those updates and just drop them into the Updates folder so that when it installs, it just installs those updates with it. The other method that you can actually use is download those updates and just double-click on the MSP files at the end and just install those as part of the sequencing monitoring phase. So the goal here is basically having a Office 2010 installation on your sequencing machine that's already set up and has all of the components and all of the updates ready to be deployed out there. There's also a set of registry changes in the deployment guide, in the recipe. And those changes have to be made during monitoring or post-sequencing. So some things, or some of those registry settings just to be aware of is that if you use a 64-bit operating system, use the WOW6432 node, else the registry changes will be going to the incorrect locations. Also, we have one called side-by-side app extensions that we asked to make certain registry changes for. Those registry changes actually enable Visio to work correctly. And if you don't set those registry changes, Visio tends to fail or works incorrectly. We have SharePoint registry keys that we also enable and change. And those SharePoint registry keys basically enable the proxy activations that we spoke about earlier to allow the ActiveX controller to speak correctly into the virtualized version of Office. We also have a section in the recipe that says when you are sequencing Office 2010, set some of those registry keys to merge with the local operating system. Now, if you don't go and check that the registry keys are merged with the local operating system, what we've actually seen is a number of SharePoint issues where you're trying to use SharePoint and just SharePoint will crash on you. So setting those registry keys or confirming that those registry keys are set to merge from the recipe is really important. We've also got another set of registry keys which is around Outlook 2007 to Outlook 2010 profile migration and coexistence. And if you don't set those registry keys, we don't have that coexistence and easy migration to Outlook 2010. So just be aware of that. And also there's some registry keys around the OMS add-in in the Office suite. And to have that function and work correctly, you also need to make a couple of other registry changes to make sure that OMS add-in does work as it's expected to. Now, when you do go through and you sequence and you get to the editing stage of the sequencer, you're going to end up with a list of shortcuts. And those shortcuts will represent Word, Outlook, PowerPoint, Excel, and any other things that you've sequenced in the package. And one of the things that you have to go through and do when you come to that edit stage is go through and change all of the version numbers so that they're matching. And they don't have to match the exact version number of the Office suite, but they do have to be matching all of the way through. So what I'm going to do now is just quickly flip over to a demo. And essentially what we've done at this moment in time is we've gone through all of the planning stages. We've gone through and we've considered all of our options in our environment. And what we've done is we've decided, you know what, we're going to have the far right-hand side option delivered. So we're going to deliver out the Office suite as a big suite of applications, and then dynamically suite in our add-ins as and when we require them, or as and when we need them. So what I've got here is I've got my Office, my Windows 7 platform, and on my Windows 7 platform, I've actually delivered out Office 2010 locally, deployed Office 2010 virtually to this machine. And if I click on Word 2010, Word 2010 will execute, and that will launch. If I click on one of my documents, Word 2010 executes, and it launches correctly. So that's great. That's great for my environment. Now, all of a sudden, I get a call from my sales team or one of my Microsoft engineers, and they say, you know what, Justin, Office 2010 works absolutely amazingly. But you know what we need in our department? We need a specific add-in or a specific plug-in so that we can do our job and do our job function correctly. So in the AppV environment, we have this concept called dynamic suite composition. I'm just going to log in here. And we have a tool for dynamic suite composition, which is this tool here. And essentially, it comes in 3 stages. There's a top left, top right, bottom left. The top left represents your content path. This is where all of your AppV applications are located. The top right specifies what you want as your primary package. In our scenario here, we want Office 2010 x86. And the left-hand side represents your other applications that are available to be suited into your primary application. And what you'll notice is that for Office 2010 already on the top right-hand side, I've already suited in a number of applications that I can have as add-ins or plugins. So I've suited in things like Snagit, a tool that's internal to Microsoft called Microsoft Artwork, the Outlook Social Connector, and Power Pivots. Now what you would have noticed is when I launched Word 2010, I had no add-ins. I had no plugins whatsoever. And what I'm using in this environment is the Microsoft Office, the Microsoft AppV full infrastructure to deliver out my applications to my environment. And based on whether I've got access permissions to these applications, I will either get the plugin or not get the plugin. So as I say, my colleagues phoned me up. They said, right, Justin, I need this MS at Work plugin for Office. And we know that MS at Work wasn't there on the plugin section of Microsoft Word. So now I can go in, click on my memberships, go add, say I want JZarb to have access to this application, go back to my client operating system, do a thing called a publishing refresh, where I just hit refresh applications, and that will speak back to my server and get me the updated version of my credentials to use the applications. And now when I execute Word, oh, that's always a bad show. Now when I execute Word, kill that. What we should see is the plugin getting loaded in. Now what happened previously a moment ago was actually I had Word still running in the background, and because Word hadn't shut down, it was trying to execute this new setup that I had access to without me actually making the modifications or changes to my environment. So now Word's going to launch, and in the top right-hand corner of my Word suite, I'm now going to hopefully see an MS at Work section, basically an add-in dynamically added into my Word platform. And at the end of this, I could just literally, if I didn't want it at the end of the day, so here we go, MS at Work here, and then I can start creating new applications or new Office suites or new modifications. But say I'm fed up with that. Say I don't need MS at Work anymore, and MS at Work is basically made redundant. I don't need to use it whatsoever. I can go back back into my environment, and I can say, you know what, let's remove him from MS at Work. But actually, what I now need is Snagit. So I'm just going to add my user to the Snagit group. Now I can come down to my Office Suite, refresh my applications. I'm just going to kill off anything that I've got running at the moment. And now when I click on my document, what we should see is that I no longer have MS at Work, and what I end up having is the Snagit add-in. So now think of that in your environment. Think of how hard it is to manage some of those plugins and add-ins in your environment. So now I've got no longer MS at Work, but I have an add-in for Snagit, and I can now execute and start using that plugin. So now I can be really selective. I can be really selective that my sales division only gets to see the sales add-ins, that my marketing team only gets to see the marketing add-ins, that my HR team only gets to see the HR add-ins that I require. Or in Excel, I only see the add-ins that I really need to use to do my job function correctly. So now we have our virtualized version of Office 2010, and our add-ins and plugins just by dynamically being added in as and when I require them. Pretty cool, eh? Any questions on that out of interest? Yep. Yeah, so if you have access to those applications and you're a laptop user, for example, what you can actually do is in the group policy object, we've got a methodology that'll actually stream the remainder of the application down to your machine. And then when you go offline, you just have the application made available to you. So it's already there. So it's stored locally in a master cache file on that platform that wherever you go, whether you're out in the field, whether you're going from site to site, you always have the application 100% loaded on your machine and fully available to you. So now we've gone through, we've sequenced our application, we've got our methodology, and we're using this dynamically suited methodology. So now I want to just talk about the client deployment. You've already created your app. How do we get it out there? How do we get that virtualized version of Office out there? What do we do about licensing? What about the publishing methodologies? What about those virtual proxies? How do we configure them? And I'm not going to forget the gotchas, because there are some gotchas with this as well. So this is our recommended push order for getting Microsoft App V and Office 2010 out there together. And it's quite a simple flow that you would install the App V client out there, then you install the deployment kit on the client with specific licensing parameters, then publish your Office 2010 deployment to your client machines, and then use the optional command line parameters around the deployment kit to make the proxies enabled and the proxies work correctly. So when you go and initially deploy out, so you've deployed out the App V client, now you have to think about the licensing parameters. And the deployment kit is, again, taken from what we use from the sequencer, and now that deployment kit is simplified when we deploy it to our clients. And again, it's a very similar methodology. We push out the Office vert.msi, and that's based on your client bitness that you deploy it out to, not your not your Office bitness, but your OS bitness. And then you specify your licensing flag. So whether you're deploying this out using KMS or deploying it out using Mac activation, and whether you want a standard user just to activate this on their own. Then you have your package publishing methodology. And this is how do we get our App V package out there to our client workstations. And you can use SCCM to do that. You can use a third-party ESD solution using SFT MIME. You can use the App V management server to also push those client applications out there into your environment. So this is what the deployment kit actually looks like, the command line for deploying out the proxies out there into your environment. The big things to take into consideration here is just a standard MSI exec command line. You just want to make sure you have no spaces after the commas for each one of the parameters that you're going to use to deploy out the proxies. Also make sure that you have braces around your package GUID that's going to be required for your that you virtualized the Office suite from. And also make sure that your capitalization is correct. This is a case-sensitive command line. If you don't have the case sensitivity correct, it can be somewhat troublesome to troubleshoot and find out what's going on. So this is my end deployment. As you can see, I've got all of my parameters there. I've taken my package GUID from my sequence version of Office 2010. My package version is consistent against all of my shortcuts that I created in the sequencing workstation, on the sequencing workstation. And also my Outlook name, my OneNote name, has case-sensitive naming. So you must make sure that's exactly the same on all of your platforms. So here are some of the deployment gotchas that just to be aware of. The OneNote printer functionality is only available if you publish to a machine. So that's essentially using the SFT MIME and a /global command line to push out to your client operating systems. Also, one of the things with the print to OneNote is that it actually requires OneNote to be started or OneNote to be executed first of all to initialize that OneNote printer. And also, one other thing to be aware of is that the send to email won't send to virtual Office if you already have Outlook 2007 on the local platform. So just be aware, if you start to have these sort of challenges or start to have these issues in your environment, it can be down to some of these sort of gotchas. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to flip over to my actual corporate machine. And this is running Office 2010. And I don't have, I don't use anything else bar a virtual version of Office. And I have exactly the same experience that my standard user has. So, you know, I use Office all the time. Office is pretty much my primary productivity tool. I tend to look at the social. We have a social in Microsoft where we send emails out to see whether you want to buy stuff. And just to show you my client again, here's my client deployment. I have the AppV client deployed out there, but also a little bit further down under all my rest of my drivers, I also have the Microsoft Office 2010 deployment kit installed on my platform. So that's now activated. For my first 2-bit version of Office, I now have all of these integration features, all of these integration components. So now I can go into Office 2010, and I can go onto my social, and I can say, show me all of the Xbox stuff that's for sale. And there's some games for sale. So now I can quickly go through and search my emails, search my platform for these any emails with specific keywords. If I'm in the Explorer shell, I can now do a search for files that have keywords in there as well. So if I type in New Zealand, I can see all my PowerPoint presentations that I was creating for this New Zealand Tech Ed. I can also see some of my friends that were from New Zealand that have sent me their resume as well. So I can really quickly check down and find out those keywords and have exactly that exact same rich experience. If I'm in a SharePoint site or if I'm just on a website browsing, and I see an email. Maybe this is an email for myself. Maybe this is an email for another person you want to get contact with. I can now click on that email link, and that email link will activate Office 2010. This didn't used to happen in Office 2007. This is a real painful activity. So now that Mail to functionality is working correctly. And likewise, if I go into my documents and I search for a document, I can also right-click on the document, go Send to, and I can do mail recipient, and that again will get sent out using Outlook 2010 to my platform, using my platform. So there's Outlook 2010, and there's my email attached to my mail. The other thing I can also do is if I'm in SharePoint and I want to edit or change a document, I can literally click on that document, and that will open up the option to read only or edit the document. And if I select read only, that will now allow me the ability to edit and change and modify those files and have that real rich integration with SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2007 that you want in your business. So all of the standard Office suites work, and all of the standard Office suites work in exactly the same way when you do virtualize Office 2010. The big benefit that I see and the big benefit that I get when I do virtualize Office 2010 is this. So I have Office down here, and I have Excel. And this is my first 2-bit version of Excel that I'm executing. I've dynamically suited in some plugins. So now I have Power Pivots dynamically suited into my Excel x86 version. But for me, sometimes Excel x86 isn't the number crunching machine that I really want. And I now have the ability with Microsoft AppV to deploy not only Office x86, but also Office x64 side by side. So here on my left-hand side is Office x86. Here on my right-hand side is Office 64-bit. And if I just go to File, Help, so down here we have a 64-bit version of Office. And if I do File, Help, we have the 32-bit version of Office. Never before have you had the ability to run both the Office 32-bit suite and the Office 64-bit suite side by side natively, having exactly the same rich experience on the client platform. So just to finish off, we have some online resources, and these are some great resources. We have an AppV forum. We also have the sequencing recipe that you can utilize and actually go through to create your Office 2010 package. We also have an MVP sequencing video where they literally go through on YouTube the complete end-to-end of sequencing Office 2010. So you can watch that in your own time and in your own leisure. And there's also some technical articles about how you use dynamic suite composition to basically suite in add-ins and plugins into your Office products. So there is some Q&A, and we can take that outside. I want to be a good speaker to the next person. Thank you very much for all of your time today. If you do have any questions to say, please do come and grab me, and enjoy your lunch.